All right. Hey, cool. It's homework 5 part 2 lab. And for those of us who are joining in person, I'm sorry that the camera looks this way. And I hope that it's not like that on Wednesday. Let's see. Where did we last leave off? Probably start with where it says start with part 2. And here we are. I'm clicking this button, which runs all the code above that current chunk in order. And so now I have all of the things that we've been working on during our first section with this homework. Run this one also. Great. Before we get started on part 2, do we have any questions about part 1 and how any of those things are going? Okay. Great. I'm going to knit so that I can read this and it not be green and red and blue. Okay, part 2. So first we're going to be looking at the Democratic support rates. We want to get measures of Democratic support in each precinct for each of our 3 races. You are asked to measure support as the percentage of votes in a precinct for the Democratic candidate out of all votes for candidates or write-ins. So this time, do not include blank votes or overvotes, where the voter indicated multiple choices, in the overall vote count for the denominator. Hint, a good approach here is to compute the total votes, so the denominator, for each precinct, and then merge, so something like the left join, on the Democratic vote count for each race in the numerator, and then divide by the total votes. That is, Dem support is going to be equal to the count of the votes for Dems divided by the total votes. For computing candidate votes, you'll probably want to follow a process like this. First, make a new data frame with the total number of votes cast for any actual candidates, including write-in, in each precinct and race. Hint, you'll likely want to use filter followed by group by and summarize using the sum of count variable. Second, make another data frame with the total number of votes for Democratic candidates in each precinct and race. You'll want to check the party of candidates and work only with the Democratic observations to get those vote counts. Hint, there are different Democratic parties for each for different races, things like Dem and DPN. Third, merge the total votes data with the Democratic votes data, then calculate a percent Democratic votes variable for each race. Okay, kind of long-winded for just the first question. Hello, welcome in. But let's get started. Okay, so first, I think we should try to figure out the kinds of votes that are available per race and party, so that we can start figuring out how we're going to make a new data frame with the total number of votes for any actual candidates at the precinct and race level. So we could start with our KC flag data that we made before. Recall that this is the data set that has a column that says whether or not things are in Seattle or not. We'll start with the KC flag data and pipe that to select, since we're only interested in the race and the precinct and the counter type. And then we'll look at the distinct values for each of those combinations of columns. And we'll see things like for the governor, there's the Adair precinct, and there are votes for Jay Inslee and Bill Bryant and Sierra Sabib. Okay. I was hoping I could get the third column in there. Does it not just go by stretching this out? I guess it does. Maybe if I run it again. Yeah. Let's see. For Lieutenant Governor, we get Marty McClendon and Daryl Castle and Scott Bradley. This is a president and VP because Hill Clinton and Tim Kaine are here. Jill Stein. What happened to Jill Stein? Okay. So it looks like I'm looking at this that we don't necessarily want our times overvoted or times counted, but we do want to keep write-in because those are separate from because those are separate from things like times overvoted. They are legitimate votes that we want to count, whereas overvoted are things that we don't care about. Let's see. How would we get just our write-ins and get the right count? Okay. So here's what we'll do. We'll make a new chunk. And this is where we're just going to get the row totals per candidate and the votes for them. So we will take the Casey flag data, and then we want to keep the rows that are not no party and the rows that are write-in. So we can filter party not equal to no party, or counter type equals write-in. Right, that's how you spell write-in in this data set. Yes. It's a capital I on it. And then we want to get just the columns that we're interested in. So the precinct, the race, the party, the counter type, and the sum of counts. And I'm forgetting what we named our Seattle flag variable. C flag. Great. And so let's look at the top of that so that we can see that we have what we have. We have per precinct a race with the party of the candidate, a candidate, and the count of votes for them. And then we've also included the write-ins per race at each precinct. But since we don't really care about the underlying who people wrote in, we just want to use that number to get the denominator. Let's see. Yeah, and then we want to, now that we're like happy with what we have, we want to save this to an object. We'll call it candidate vote rows. and get rid of the head function. So are we cool with how we're getting to this space and why we're doing these things so far? Still processing, but we're okay. Okay. Next, are going to want to get the sum of all of the votes per precinct race so that we have the denominator for this formula. We're trying to get our total votes here. And the way we're going to do that is with our candidate vote rows, we're going to add them all up by our precinct and race. I'm going to make a new chunk here for clarity that we're making another data frame. So we'll call this one total candidate votes. And I'm already like pretty comfortable with what this calculation is going to look like. So I'm just going to say that what the object is first instead of doing it last. And we're going to give it our candidate vote rows that we just made. And then, like I said, we want to get the totals by precinct and race. So we're going to group by precinct. That's not how you spell precinct. Precinct and race, and also C flag. We're interested in that. And since it's not going to vary across the pairs of precincts and race, it's okay to add it into the group by so that we can retain that column. And then we're going to summarize that the total candidate votes is equal to the sum of our sum of count row, or sum of count column. If you want to see the top of that, we can say so now what we have is per precinct and race, the total amount of votes that were for any of our candidates. So this is for governor, for instance, we had Jay Inslee and Bill something or other, and write-ins. So we're cool with where this stuff is in relation to our instructions. So like I said, we are making this denominator here for our total votes by making a new data frame with the total number of votes cast for any actual candidates, including write-in, and each precinct and race. And so what we've done up here is we took our KC flag data, we filtered to people who are not in a party, don't constitute legitimate candidates unless they were written in. And then we take just the columns that we're interested in. We've grouped by our precinct and race, like it says in the instructions, and gotten our total sum of the votes. And we've included our C flag just for our purposes later. Cool. Okay, now what we want to do is get our numerator. So we want our dem count here. So we're going to move on to step 2. Make another data frame with the total number of votes for Democratic candidates in each precinct and race. You'll want to check the party of candidates and work only with the Democratic observations to get those vote counts. There are different Democratic parties for each for different races. So let's make yet another chunk. Actually, I should go back and name these chunks for clarity. Let's call this checking for what are we doing here? We're checking the counter type because we are interested in I'm going to say checking for write-in. Here we're going to say subsetting to legitimate candidates. And here we'll call this one getting the total for the denominator. If that's spelled wrong, y'all can laugh at me. That's cool. Okay. So we want the Dem candidates. We probably want to see the Dem rows specifically. We can take our candidate vote rows data that we made up here. So we know that it's already gotten rid of all the things that were not in a party. And then we can select the race, the party, and the counter type. And then see what like unique pairs we have of each of these things. So we can see like in the governor race, we had Dem, Rep, and our write-ins. Lieutenant governors, Dem, president, we had CPN, DPN. Yeah, DPN appears to be Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine, like we might expect. So it is really just Dem for Jay Inslee, Dem for Cyrus Habib, and DPN for Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. And it doesn't appear like there are any other strange ones. I think that might have been the case when I took this class, and it was using the 2012 data. So. We'll name this one checking for Dem names. Checking for Dem names. Okay, so we feel that there's only Dem and DPN are the parties of our that we're interested in. So we should take our candidate vote rows and then filter party. We'll use the percent and percent because we have a couple of different names, Dem and DPN. I'm going to go back and run this again to make sure that I'm spelling Dem right and that it has a capital D. It does. We're in there. That's cool. So we had the candidate vote rows, and then we filter to party, percent and percent, Dem, and DPN. And then we'll select precinct, race, C flag, and sum of count. And you'll see here that since we've already subset to our Dem rows, our sum of count just tells us how many votes there were for Dems. And so we could just rename that column for clarity, Dem votes equals sum of count. Are we cool with how we got to that step? I'm not quite sure why it's like that. I'm sorry. Yes. I'm sorry? Yes. Mhm. I think so. As you're describing it, I think so. I think you're on the right track. Um, Great. So we're cool with how we got here. Okay. I'm now going to assign this to a new object so that we have it for later. I'm going to call it Democratic vote rows. Now that we've seen it. Okay. Okay, so here I've renamed a column. But here I'm like making a new data frame that is all of what this calculation outputs. Mhm. Making down, yeah, it's sufficiently explanatory to me. I think that counts as getting through our second part. Make another data frame with the total number of votes for Democratic candidates in each precinct and race. You'll want to check the party of candidates, work only with Democratic observations to get these vote counts. Pretty confident in that we have those. Third, we're going to merge the total data with the Democratic votes data, then calculate a percent Democratic vote variable for each race. Okay. I'm going to make another chunk for clarity. And here we'll call it computing dem support. And we will start with our Democratic vote rows data that we just made in the prior chunk. Couldn't get my spacing quite right. And then we're going to left join our total candidate votes data. So this is us joining our numerator with our denominator, so to speak, so that we can do our calculations. We're going to left join by total candidate votes. And we're going to say by equals, and we're going to supply a vector of columns, column names. So precinct, race, and C flag. So let's see what that looks like. Democratic vote rows not found. I misspelled something, or I didn't make this already. There we go. So once we've left joined our denominator data with our numerator data, we will have our precinct, our race, whether or not it's in Seattle, the Dem votes, and the total candidate votes, including write-ins. Oh, yeah, of course. So first what we did is we checked for where we saw write-ins. And then we created this candidate vote rows data frame. And the way that we did that is we took the KC flag data that we made for part 1. We filtered for votes or candidates who were not in a party. We got rid of those. And for counter type equals write-in to keep all of our write-ins votes. And then we selected the columns we wanted to keep around. So we're cool there?
Yeah, I guess after you're done, I can just get those in.
Sure. I mean, we can do it now, or you want to do it at the end?
Yeah, I will do it now.
Yeah, I'm saying these are done.
I don't I can have them in. I'm sitting out as
Right, but I'm saying this is the top.
I know, so can I go ahead and just get one?
Yeah, I'm saying we're cool to, you can just do it now. We're good.
Between and what is that?
It is a bar for
Oh,
or
okay.
just above enter on your right hand side.
Right. Hold on.
Of course.
Okay, I think I'm good.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
You know it. Let's see. So we were just joining our Democratic vote rows and our total candidate votes. I'm going to run this again so that we see where we're at. So we have the precinct and the race, whether or not it's in Seattle, the amount of votes for Democratic candidates, and the total amount of votes. These should be our only 5 columns. If you've been following along with the same selects that I've been doing thus far. Yes, that's. And what? So we've merged the total votes data with Democratic votes data. Then we're going to calculate a percent Democratic votes variable for each race. So we'll say, we'll put out a pipe, and then we're creating a new column. So we'll say mutate. Let's call it Democrat support. I put it in backticks so that it can have that nice little space and look good. Democrat support is going to be equal to our Dem votes column divided by our total candidate votes column. Let's see that. So we'll see Dem votes here is 256. Our total candidate votes is 481. That seems to me to be about 0.53. That tracks. I'm feeling comfy that this calculation ran correctly. And we'll select the precinct, C flag, the race, and Democrat support. That didn't autocorrect for me for some reason. So now we have our precinct, whether or not it's in Seattle, the race, and the Democrat support as a decimal. Run this one again? Sure. Are in backticks. Cool. Okay. So next, we're going to go to combining it all. Once you've calculated Democratic voting percentages for each race, you'll want to put them back together with the precinct turnout rate data using a join. Then you'll want to make sure your data are shaped as I recommend above. One row per precinct with a column for each of the relevant measures. If your data are in a format where you have a row for each race within each precinct, so long format, you may find the pivot wider command useful for turning multiple columns or multiple rows for each precinct into single precinct rows with different columns for each race. So note, what I'm about to combine is some data from homework part 1. So if you haven't run all of that stuff, this is me saying you should. I have this data, I believe it's called turnout rates, that I will soon be joining. That was the last part of homework part 1, was creating the turnout rates. Okay. So I'm going to return to the combining it all section of the homework. To that chunk, we're going to take, actually, I'm realizing now I didn't save this to an object. I'm sorry. For computing the Dem support, we want to save that to a thing. We'll call it Democrat vote rates. My bad. Okay. So we had the registered voters and the turnout in a data frame called turnout rates. We're going to merge those using left join. So we'll take our turnout rates data, which I'll show you what it looks like right quick. It's got the precinct and whether or not it's in Seattle, the registered voters, the total amount of votes, and the turnout relative to the amount of registered voters. So that's what that data looks like. We're going to left join our Democrat vote rates data that we just made in our last chunk. Is going to be by our precinct and C flag. Let's see what that looks like. Notice how it made more rows than our turnout rates data did. This is because it has to include all of our races and it matched by precinct and C flag. But now we have our turnout and our Democrat support in the same data frame. We're going to save that to an object. We'll call it precinct data. This does have the issue of being in the incorrect format for what we want by the end. So I will now be describing how you would want to pivot it. We'll call this combine turnout Democrat. And I'll make a new chunk. And we'll call that one make clean data wide. So we're going to take our precincts data that we made in this last chunk. And then, oh goodness. I wrote the key in the way that pivot used to work. So give me a second while I think about how this is supposed to work in pivot wider, which is the only way that y'all know how to do it. So the pivot wider our names would come from the race column. Our values would come from Democrat support. I think that works. Yeah, so we're back to having one row per precinct with the registered voters, the amount of total votes, the turnout rate, and now each of our races is its own column, and it tells us how many votes went for the Dem candidate in that race. Are we cool with how we got here and what's going on to make pivot wider do what it did? Yes. Okay. I'm also going to just rename all of these columns so that they're a little bit less clunky. Whoops. Governor can say as is. Let's say LT governor equals governor. And we'll just say president equals US president. Okay, that's looking better. What else do we need to do? I think that's it. I think we're good with one precinct, whether or not it's in Seattle, the registered voters times counted turnout. Governor is going to go to president. Okay. And we're going to call this wide precinct data and save it to that object so that we can keep this data frame that's already pivoted and has these new column names. Backticks, yes. Yes, this one as well. Sorry, I keep forgetting that the screen behind me is like covered in schmutz. Of course. Okay. So we've done all of this stuff. Now to graphing the results. So first thing first, we're going to make turnout. We're going to make a scatter plot, or the horizontal axis, our x-axis, is the number of registered voters in the precinct. And the vertical axis, the y-axis, is the turnout rate. We're going to color the precincts in Seattle one color and use a different color for the other precincts. And then we'll see if we observe anything. Okay. Make scatter plot. So first things first, we're going to use a ggplot. Our data is going to be our wide precinct data. We'll set the aesthetics so that X is going to equal, I'm forgetting the names of our data off the top of my head. It's just called registered voters. Great. So registered voters is going to be our x-axis. Our y-axis is going to be turnout. And our color is going to be C flag, as well as our group. Okay, and we wanted a scatter plot, so that's just going to be our G on point. Let's see what that looks like. Couldn't find ggplot. Okay. 3, 2. So we've got this gang of schmutz. Maybe we can make it look a little bit nicer. Let's change our alpha. This will change the amount of transparency, like how faded the colors of our dots are. we'll make sure that the size of our dots is equal to 1. We could add a smoother. Let's use a low S line. Yeah, that's looking so far. Okay, it's telling me some content. It doesn't seem to be like a big deal with our not a number calculations there. You could add a scale Y continuous where the breaks and so this will keep our turnout between 0 and 100. And then we can go back to turnout and multiply that by 100 so that the numbers are a little bit easier to read. Our turnout thing label should be changed, but that's okay for now. But we're getting a nicer plot bit by bit. Let's see. We can scale our colors and say values equals, I don't know, orange and navy blue. Looking easier to read because of the contrast. Actually, what does this say? C flag still? Perhaps we should change, we can add a comma right here and say name. Is it just name? Is location. Now this says location. We should probably change the title and stuff. Title, we call it turnout rates by precinct in County 2016. Add an X label. Y label. Something like turnout percent registered voters living in residential. I don't like the default gray all that much, so maybe we could do in black and white. Great. Note that this little /n just has it skip a line. It's how you can force R to make something skip a line or hit return. So that's why turnout is on a separate line than this parenthetical. Yeah, it's removed a couple of values. This is because of division by 0. I've already checked on this. That's okay. It seems, looking at this data, that Seattle seems to have a higher turnout rate for the presidential race than other non-Seattle King County precincts. Maybe particularly above about 250 registered voters. I don't know. I feel like this is a really high turnout for Seattle, or for any race, really. I would say that, though, I'm glad that this is in parenthetical, that it's out of registered voters, because if you wanted to know like the true turnout rate, you would need like census data or something. Okay, cool.
one equal to turn that's space.
Sorry, this is an asterisk. So on your number 8 key for multiply.
Oh.
This is an asterisk. I'm sorry if my accent is in the way. I can't really say that word. But the yeah, this that's yeah. Your number 8 key right there. Goodness. Um, okay. Yeah, because we're just graphing things, so it's not predicated on the thing that was ahead of it. Okay. So we did the turnout plot. Now we're going to do Democratic support plot. Now let's visualize Democratic support rates for the 3 races within each precinct for sufficiently large precincts. Limit the data to precincts with at least 500 registered voters. Use the filter command to do this. Make a line plot where the horizontal axis, X, indicates precincts, and the vertical axis, Y, shows the Democratic support rates. There should be 3 lines in different colors, 1 for each race of interest. Do not label the precincts on the horizontal axis. Use scale X discrete, breaks equals null is one method for doing this. You should, however, arrange them on the axis in order from smallest to largest in terms of support for Democratic candidate for president. That is, the line plotting percentage support for Obama, okay, that's a typo, should be smoothly increasing from left to right. The order of the lines in the legend should follow the order of the lines at the right edge of the plot. To do this, we need to use the wide version of data, 1 row per precinct, and order precinct based on Democratic support for president. Hint, you'll probably want to use in the forecast package factor reorder on precinct. Then we reshape the back from wide to tidy using pivot longer so that we have 1 variable giving the race and another giving vote percentage, and can plot a separate line for each race. Okay. Well, let's get started doing that. A lot of space there. Let's see. We want to have our data be for sufficiently large precincts. So let's say we have a wide precinct data, and we'll filter registered voters is greater than or equal to 500. Note, registered voters is in backticks. And next, we want to make sure that our precincts are ordered correctly. So we're going to say precinct here. Note, this means that we're going to be overwriting our precinct column. Precinct is equal to, we're going to get from the forecast package, factor reorder. And we're going to reorder our precinct column by our president column. And then we wanted to pivot longer. Names 2 is going to say race. And sorry, I wrote this in the antiquated version of doing this, so it always takes me a second to translate. I think we supply through calls. Governor, lieutenant governor, and president. We might be doing some troubleshooting here. We'll see. I mean, we did get our 3 columns back. Okay, this looks about right. But it looks like this has got the name value for some reason. I see. That's because you also have to say values 2 is equal to what's the word? Turnout. No, it's not turnout. Sorry. Democrat support. Yes. So to describe what happened here, we took our wide precinct data. We filtered to only the rows where precincts had greater than or equal to 500 registered voters. We reordered our precinct column in order of how many votes were for, or what was the support like for Hillary Clinton. And then we pivoted our data from wide to turn it back into long by taking each of our columns for governor, lieutenant governor, and president, and turning those back into rows with a race column and a value and a Democrat support column rather than a column for each. We cool there? I'm going to save this to tidy big precinct data. Tidy because it follows the tidy principles. Big because the precincts are greater than or equal to 500.
It's not it's not.
Here, do you have 2 sets of colons here? Forecast, colon, colon, factory order. Okay, I'm sorry. So that's that data that we're going to use to make our really obnoxious plot. We are going to dplot. The data is going to equal our tidy big precinct data. And our aesthetics, our X is going to equal precinct. Our Y is going to be Democrat support. Note, I put those in backticks again. Our group is going to be the race, and our color is going to be the race. And before it gets too far, we're already going to multiply this times 100. So we're already going to use the same asterisk times 100 thing as we did before. We're going to make a geom line because it asks for a line per race and a color per race. We'll just go ahead and make it at least a little bit transparent so that the lines don't overlap too bad. And we're going to scale X discrete breaks equals null. We're doing this because the precinct is on the x-axis, and so it's going to print the name of each precinct on the x-axis unless we say don't print anything. And you would just get a bunch of stacked titles on the bottom. So let's see what it looks like so far. We're on the right track, seems like. Let's keep adding things so that we can clarify what this graph is going to be looking like. We can add a title. Let's call it democratic support for democratic support in 3 races. And I'm going to use that same /n in order to have it jump to the next line. King County 2016 large precincts. Let's scale our y-axis to have it look more pleasing for our viewers. We'll say the breaks are equal to sequence 30 to 100. I set to 10 because it's not that we're interested in things that are below 30. I'm sure that those places with at least 500 registered voters didn't have less than 30% turnout. We can also supply a name to this. We'll call it percent of voters, percent of votes within precinct for Dem candidates. And we can scale color manual so we can get black, red, blue. I'll go ahead and add theme black and white now. I think that we should change the name of it here. So after, in the scale X discrete, I'm going to change the name for legibility to say precinct ordered by Clinton report. Okay. You probably don't see a plot like this too often. it's a way that you can represent three-dimensional information. So this is Dem support rates for each of the three positions per precinct, and it's also in 2 dimensions. By putting observations in order of the horizontal axis and showing 3 values of interest at the same time on the vertical axis. Yeah, we could look at an alternative way to do this, but I feel like this is kind of what I was hoping for in the instructions. So we're cool with what's going on here in this GG plot. Do you have any questions in the code?
I made the mistake of not renaming it as president, which means that everywhere that I enjoy as president,
Oh goodness, I'm sorry.
no, it's fine.
Yeah.
I stopped. But that's fine. That's fine. It's not everywhere. But then it should work like normal stuff.
Yes. Sure. Let's figure that out in a second. I'm gonna close the stream. I feel like that was the end. Let me check against. Yes, that's the last thing. Okay. I don't know how to close it. Maybe I just close this.